And greetings YouTube gamers, welcome to another episode of Retro Raider. My name is Johnny Retro and welcome to the channel. So today I'm here to talk about one of my favorite Sega Mega Drive games of all time, and that game is Comix Zone. Now for those of you who still haven't heard about Comix Zone is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up game developed and published by Sega, released in 1995. Now as a huge fan of beat-em-up games, this game is not your average beat-em-up game. This is actually one of the most unique and original games that I've ever seen. You know, beat 'em up games is a genre that, it kind of follows a certain trend and formula. Games like, Double Dragon, Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Rival Turf, etc. It's easy to label them, as clones of each other. But I can guarantee to you that you will not find a beat 'em up game like Comix Zone. So the premise of the game is this. Now, the protagonist of the game is Sketch Turner, and Sketch Turner is a comic book artist from New York who is recently working on a comic book called Comix Zone. So one night during a thunderstorm, a lightning bolt hits one of the panels from Sketch's comic book, and for some reason that is never explained during the game, that makes the main villain of the game and Sketch's comic book come to life in the real world. So this guy Mortus, he comes to the real world, but he doesn't have his powers on the real world, so in order to being able to regain his powers, he traps Sketch within the comic book, and he must kill him from the outside world. And the way he tries to do it is by drawing adversaries for Sketch to fight. Now within the comic book, Sketch meets a general called Elisa, who thinks he's like the chosen one who is going to save the world. So she sends him on his mission, and she's always in contact with him via radio, providing them with tips and stuff like that. So, so far, the story is kind of quirky, but, kind of original, but, you really don't need a very deep story for a good beat-em-up game. But what makes this game special is the gameplay. You see, Comix Zone is not only a beat-em-up game, it kind of has, a lot of influences from games like, platformers, puzzle games, and fighting games. In fact, the combat system of this game is so complex that, this game could be a fighting game on its own. It's not just about, fighting waves of enemies, you have a lot of, you have combos, you have multiple attacks, it really feels like a fighting game when you're fighting inside Comix Zone. You also have a lot of jumps and platforms to go around. You have a pet on the game, a rat that helps you with certain puzzles. Another thing that I have to point out is the graphics of this game. Comix Zone truly shows the potential of the Sega Mega Drive. I must say that, this is not only one of my favorite Sega Mega Drive games, but, from my personal collection, this is definitely the best good-looking game on the system. The sprites are super sharp, the animations are incredible, and the music, of course, the music of this game is one of the best Sega scores. But with all of that being said, this game was a failure. And the reason for that is that, this game came out in a very weird time for Sega. You see, during the mid-90s, Sega made some very poor marketing decisions. You see, during the mid-90s, it was a very strange period for Sega because, they were promoting so much systems that it's crazy. I mean, we're talking about the Sega Mega Drive, the Sega 32X, the Sega Mega CD, the Sega Game Gear, the Sega Nomad, the Sega Pico, I mean, all at the same time. And don't forget that, during that time period, Sega was popular in Brazil and Europe, of course, but, Nintendo was dominating everyone else. And another very important aspect is that, 1995 was pretty much the beginning of the 5th generation of video game consoles. 32-bit power, 3D graphics, and of course that, when the PlayStation 1 came, it ruled everyone else. So when Comix Zone was released, it was pretty much a dead fish in water. Although it looks beautiful and amazing, when it was released, it was already outdated. So let me tell you how I discovered Comix Zone. So this was 2006, I think, and that's when I started to get into retro games. But at the time, I didn't have, a lot of money to invest in video game systems and retro video games, although they were cheap back in the day, but, I just didn't have the pocket for it. So what I did was emulation. So I got a bunch of emulators and a bunch of ROMs, and at the time I was looking for, games that I didn't have the chance to play as a kid. And by accident I found out about Comix Zone, so I picked up a ROM for it, and I was just totally amazed by it. I finished the game so many times on the emulator, and This was before I became a retro video game collector. So a couple of years later, about in 2010, when it was pretty much the beginning of the retro video game boom, I got a Sega Mega Drive with a bunch of games, and I was looking for, the classic Mega Drive games, like Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Sonic, and stuff like that. But on a stroke of luck, I found this beautiful copy of Comix Zone. So this one is pretty much in a great shape. You have the box, the cartridge, the 2 manuals, and the soundtrack. Now, even with the popularity of retro gaming, Comix Zone is a game that it didn't got much attention, I would say, until about 3 years or so. As a matter of fact, if I was making this video 3 years ago, this will be a hidden gem video. But this is no longer a hidden gem. With a lot of information out there and with the trend of retro video games, I think that a lot of people kind of know this game, and this game actually gathered a cult following around it. And that's a very strange thing. How this game evolved within the community, because I remember back in the day, you could get a copy like this, for 10 euros. But nowadays, for 10 euros you get the card only. I've seen some auctions on eBay with copies like mine going for about 60 euros or so. So my advice to you is that if you're looking for a copy of Comix Zone, or if you're after a Sega Mega Drive set, this is probably the best time to buy it, because I don't see the price of this game slowing down. And you're hearing this from an European guy. In Europe, Sega Mega Drive is cheaper than everyone else. So for me, at least, 60 euros for a complete Sega Mega Drive game, it's kind of an expensive game. There's also a couple of people complaining about the difficulty of the game. This is a very hard game, and a kind of short one. You just have a couple of levels, but I think that it is not frustrating. It's not difficult just for the sake of being difficult. And the replayability of the game, it's actually on the actual gameplay. It feels very good. The controls are pretty tight, it's a delight for the eyes. I would even say, I would compare this game to a Neo Geo title. The game looks that good. And another very important thing, if you're planning to pick a copy of Comix Zone, definitely pick up a 6-button controller. You see, the game was programmed to be used with a 6-button controller, and if you play it with a standard one, you will have a hard time. So just make sure that you have one of these. So to sum it up, if you're looking for a very unique game, definitely pick up Comix Zone. It's just a blast. This game is a total blast. That was it, guys. This was just me talking about one of my favorite video games for one of my favorite video game systems. This is definitely one of my crown jewels of my Sega Mega Drive collection. And as always, guys, don't forget to put a like in this video, please subscribe to the channel, and take care of yourselves, take care of the gaming community, and game a lot.